87.6 FM, broadcasting from the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Anna Street in Beaudesert, across the Beaudesert, Veersdale and Glen Eagles area. The basic outline for my message today includes a sharing of my experience when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and how a deceptive and greedy guide thwarted my attempt to get to the summit. I used to work for Adventist World Radio. I travelled around the world to many countries, helping to get media centres set up so that they could increase the number of languages they have on the radio. I would train the people in the local media centre, who were locals, to make programs according to set formats in their own language, within their own cultural milieu. And in doing that, we would hopefully be able to attract more listeners because it would be, from the very soil on which the language is spoken. And I was sent to Nairobi in Kenya in December 1994 to help kickstart production in Swahili, or Kiswahili as they tend to say more often these days. And there was a wonderful media centre full of all sorts of new equipment. Most of it's outdated now, I might say, but at the time it was fairly good stuff. And of course, as we all know, Kenya is a land full of adventure and outdoors kinds of experiences. The wildlife, the game parks, they're all part and parcel of what you would expect to find when you go to Africa, especially a country like Kenya. And while I was there, I had a chance to go to Lake Nakuru, which is famous for its flamingo population. And I was driving around in a very old car that a friend of mine and his family had available, and he and I were walking around in the bush looking for buffaloes and taking photos up close and dodging. Well, we didn't get attacked by any lions or leopards. We could have been. We were rather brazen in our outdoor activities there, and I wouldn't be quite so brazen again, I don't think. I also went to Masai Mara, which is a game park where the Maasai warriors and tribespeople live in their traditional settings, and indeed it was quite thrilling to camp out in a tent and hear the lions roaring off in the distance. It didn't make for good sleeping at first, but knowing that the Maasai guards and warriors were standing by was somewhat reassuring. And my ultimate goal in being there was, in terms of adventure at least, was to try and climb Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain on the African continent. And I did get a chance to do that in early December, I think, or late November of 1994. And I set off from the base camp, and as you may know, Kilimanjaro is actually in Tanzania, not in Kenya. You can see it from Kenya, it's so big, you can see it for a long way away. But it actually is inside Tanzania, so I had to cross over into Tanzania to get to base camp. You start early in the morning and you start walking. It's a 5-day trek in total, at least for ordinary people it is. Some of the stronger climbers can do it quicker. And I had a guide and 2 strong porters to carry my stuff and all the food and all the cooking gear. And I must admit the cooking was pretty good. It wasn't vegetarian, but we managed to get by on what was available to me at that time for a few days. What is amazing about Kilimanjaro is the fact that the landscape changes as you go further up the mountain. It starts off with lush tropical rainforest, because as you know, Kilimanjaro is virtually on top of the equator. But as you go higher, the air gets thinner, the temperature gets lower on average, and you end up with different types of vegetation, different types of fauna, and it's quite interesting to see how that develops as you go. By the time you get to the summit, it's just rock. There's nothing living up there, no vegetation, just tundra, mosses, things like that. It's just gravel, rock, barren, but starkly beautiful. And of course the ice is up on top of the mountain, although because of global warming that is starting to melt, strangely enough. It's permanent ice up there, but it is slowly disappearing. So what is interesting is that it's a very hard climb. The higher you get, the harder it gets because the air gets thinner. And I had the advantage of living in Nairobi for 2 months before attempting, so being at such an elevated place, I sort of acclimatised a bit. So I didn't have too much trouble going up with the elevation sickness that can strike people as you go. You want to give up, but you press on while you're able, and the guide keeps your pace. That's his job, and he decides if you're coping with the situation. At about sunrise, you have to make you make an assault in the early part of the morning, and you arrive at Gilman's Point, which is recognised as the summit, or at least part of it, at about sunrise, and that's above 5,000 metres. Many people don't get there. It's too hard. And there is the actual summit, Uhuru Peak, about another hour further on from there. And of course, I had got up without too much trouble. It was very tough, no doubt, but I was still in a position to believe that I could go on to the next step and reach the pinnacle of Africa. However, my guide was not very keen to go with me. I don't know why, or I didn't know why at the time anyway. I insisted that we proceed to Uhuru Peak, which is about 5,300 metres or something. And but he reluctantly decided to go with me, but he tore off ahead of me in a huff, powering ahead, and I couldn't keep up with him, of course. He's an experienced mountain climber. And after about half an hour of trekking along through snow, he came back to me and he spoke with me, and he persuaded me to turn back. And I did. I decided that I wasn't going to press on. It was hard, but I wasn't, sensing that I was really in any trouble. I had seen others who came up after me go ahead, and they had reached the final peak. But ultimately, through his tone and persuasion, I decided to agree with him, and I went back. And I wasn't really happy with it, but once it was done, there was no way of trying to go up again. You run out of time. You've got to get down the mountain in a certain time frame. So as we were proceeding down the mountain, fellow climbers had caught up after going to the very peak, at Uhuru Peak, and they understood a little Swahili, and the guides were talking amongst themselves, and I later learned that my guide, whose name was Tade, I don't know what it means, but that was his name, he didn't want to take me to the summit because he sensed, based on past experience with Australians, that I wasn't going to give him a good tip. And so he didn't see why he should go to the extra effort of getting me to the top. Well, I wasn't particularly happy about learning that, I can assure you. And I did give a tip. I did anyway. I was tempted not to, but I had decided I was going to give a tip, so I gave it to him. I got a good deal, so I was budgeted for a fairly decent tip, and he went off and got drunk, as far as I know. And so I was cheated out of my goal, my right, in a sense, depending on my health, but certainly my right, as it stood, to reach the very summit of the highest mountain in Africa. I want you to turn with me to Psalms 109, verses 2 and 3. I'll read it here. For the mouth of the wicked and the mouth of the deceitful have opened against me. They have spoken against me with a lying tongue. They have also surrounded me with words of hatred and fought against me without a cause. I listened to the persuasive words of discouragement from one who had, I suppose, a lying tongue. His motives for persuading me to turn back were not in my interest, they were in his. And under stress, because it was stressful climbing, no doubt, I turned back. I did get my certificate, by the way, because you get to Gilman's Point by sunrise, you get your certificate, but I didn't get the ultimate prize. I fell short because of somebody with lying words and a deceptive spirit decided to try and turn me back. Proverbs 12:19 is another verse I'd like you to turn to. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 19. And 22. 12, 19 and 22, and here we go. The truthful lip shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counselors of peace have joy. And verse 22, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. In our spiritual trek, we also need to guard against lying lips, false guides who practice deceit. Matthew 24, verse 24, you should know this verse, says that even the elect risk being deceived in the last days as circumstances change and get more difficult to discern without spiritual insight. You can just read that verse 24, verse 24. where it says, "For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand." We need to be alert and awake. And the question comes, what false gods are of concern to us today as Christians? Are we being impacted by them, or are we just watching them have their impact on the wider society from afar, from outside? What is our attitude to deceptive theories that are being propagated in the world today?